Good morning, everyone. This is Laura Leroy. I'm the Executive Director of Social Venture Partners Charleston, which is the venture philanthropy program for Coastal Community Foundation of South Carolina. And I'm so happy to welcome you all to today's session on resilient leadership. We have two great panelists and an amazing facilitator. I know that you will all get a lot out of this program, and I encourage you all to share questions throughout utilizing the question box. You can direct a question to Darrin or Lily or Lauren, or just to them in general, and we will be answering them throughout. Also, at the end of the webinar, you will receive a survey. Please take the time to fill it out. It's really short, and hearing from you helps us deliver programs like this that you want to have happen. So again, thank you all for joining. I'm super excited to welcome you to today's session on resilient leadership with Darrin Goss, our facilitator, and Lauren Herderich and Lily Coleman, our panelists. I'm now going to turn it over to Darrin. Thank you, Darrin.
Yeah, thank you, Laura, and welcome, Lauren and Lily. Let me do a few things first, and that is to thank SVP and Dominion Energy for partnering with us on this series of professional development seminars that are being offered right now, and thank all of you for joining us this morning on what I believe will be an important conversation for all of us who lead in the nonprofit space, resilient leadership. We are currently right now facing probably four of the most dynamic and challenging situations that you could possibly be facing at the same time. A global pandemic that's ravaging the coast of South Carolina, where we call home, in dramatic ways. Economic troubles that continue to call into question what fundraising for nonprofits and for philanthropy might look like in the next 6 months to a year. A racial equity and social justice movement that is challenging us and inspiring us in many ways to our better selves. And then this fall, a political national environment that is very divisive. Any one of these things by themselves will cause us as leaders to be challenged, but all four conspiring at the same time really does require us as leaders to demonstrate clarity of vision, focus, to be not only the navigator of our organizations, but also I believe these times are calling us to be navigators in our communities. Some might call these things a part of what it takes to be a leader of an organization. We know, and our topic today is really about what it means to be a resilient leader. And I have two wonderfully important leaders in the Low Country of South Carolina, Lily Coleman and Lauren Herderich, who will be conversationalists with me this morning to talk through what resilient leadership really is. Let me just quick bio on both of them. Lauren is the Executive Director of Kids on Point here in Charleston. For the last 6 years, she's committed herself and her organization to building strong and frankly resilient young people to one day walk in leadership, both here in our Low Country, our state, and I would imagine what some of the youth I've met, our country as well. And so welcome, Lauren, this morning. Lily Coleman is the Executive Director of Second Helpings in the Beaufort area of our Low Country. We affectionately call the Southern Low Country, and the mission of Second Helpings is to rescue food and distribute that food throughout the Low Country of South Carolina. She comes to us from a variety of different stops. And Lily, we thank you and welcome you to this panel discussion this morning. If we were going to define resilient leadership based on Webster's definition, Laura, you can go to the next slide. It would look like this. Resilient leadership, you got that slide? Yeah, it didn't change. Resilient leadership is the ability to withstand shock without permanent deformation or rupture, or tending to recover from, or just easily to misfortune or change. And I think, again, all of us over the last 6 months have really been in the situation where almost daily there's some new information, some new event that literally rocks us back on our feet. But in short, being resilient means that we have the ability to bounce back from crisis like the elasticity of a rubber band. A modern definition of resilience says that we advance despite adversity, that we are focused on the goals, both of our organizations and our individual work, and that we work towards that. Despite the challenges and things that we see, we're proactive and we don't wait for the next shoe to drop. And then even in adversity, large and small, we face those everyday challenges as they come, anticipating that we have the ability and skill in teams to navigate those adversities. There are several resilience factors that I just want to quickly cover. 5 of them to be exact that are proposed by the American Foreign Service Association. One is, and I think this is critical, and I hope Lauren and Lily will be able to speak to this, is self-care, taking care of yourself. I think in these times, I just admonish all of us to really take care of ourselves, take some time off. I call it having white space, and I think we should do that. That we should actively problem solve, and that is to engage others with us in the act of problem solving, sort of projecting what might the future hold, and then how do we actively engage the future. That we have to, at most, continue to reiterate and recast the vision and purpose and mission of our organizations, because it's all very important. That we need social support, people around us, loved ones, partners, our inner circle to support us as leaders as we make some of the hardest decisions that we'll make, have made, and will make in the near future. And then I think most of all, in these critical times that we face, having a positive mental attitude or a positive outlook about the future. When things seem to be tough, I think it calls us, if nothing else, to be positive in the face of all of the things that we're facing as communities. Resilient leaders actually provide a few things. Resilient, they have the ability to sustain their energy under pressure. I think Lily and Lauren will speak to that. To cope with disruptive changes and be adaptive. We call that adaptive leadership. We bounce back after setbacks, and they also overcome major difficulties without engaging in dysfunctional behavior or harming others. I think one of the most important things we do as leaders is protect and nurture, encourage the teams that we have the benefit and the privilege of leading. And that's why I think you go back to that self-care is so important for us. This quote by William Ernest Henley sort of summarizes our responsibility as leaders to ourselves and to others. I'm the master of my own fate. I am the captain of my own soul, and we have to command those things exceptionally well. The final thing I'll say before I turn to Lauren and Lily and engage in this conversation is that resilient leaders do a couple of things well. There's clarity of direction. When there's a lot of uncertainty that we find ourselves in, I think the best and most resilient leaders are clear about the direction that they're leading their organization, so clarity of direction, that there's an awareness of the things that are happening around us. We would call that in the military situational awareness. And that's important because you might have to pivot, you may have to course correct, and obviously the two leaders here will share some examples of how they've been able to do that in the provision of their services in their nonprofits. And then we have to be present. Even today, as we have learned to adapt to a virtual environment, it's important for us to show up as leaders, to be present, to be available, to listen, but then to also offer when our employees, our teams, our communities need to hear our voice. And then, frankly, finally, resilience in decision making. It's okay to course correct. It's okay to think that we were going in one direction and to say, you know what, that's not working out. Let's change and let's adapt and let's course correct. And so with that, I want to turn to Lauren and Lily, and thank you for obliging me just a a little bit of time to set the context for our conversation this morning. But I want to ask you to really this opening question as it relates to your own work in leading your organization. And that is, how have you personally displayed resilience in leading your staff, board, and donors at the outset of this pandemic? What were some of the things that you had to do immediately, given what I've described over the last few minutes, and how has that played out for you as we are now, 6 months almost into this thing? And Lauren, we'll start with you.
Okay, great. So really, our parents designed and guided most of our conversations. So when COVID hit, it certainly reshaped what Kids on Point looks like. We are in the after school and summer space, and so we see the kids every day. We were interacting with parents. So we had to shift very quickly in that thinking because we needed to shift into a virtual sense. But we didn't want to start and design programming that wasn't going to be a benefit to our participants. We didn't want to put additional things on their plates, on top of school, on top of jobs, all those factors that kind of went in and everyone is experiencing with COVID. So we really took those questions back to our parents. And we've never been afraid at Kids on Point to kind of see beyond that adversity. We've always kind of questioned, how can we learn? How can we grow from these experiences? And how can we turn a crisis into opportunity to be better, to better serve our constituents, our participants? And really that's what's guided us through this. And that's what has guided Kids on Point for a long time. So I've actually been really excited about the programming that we've put in place through this. And it continues to change, like you said, but I think that you do have to see beyond the current grim situation and really work to serve your participants in a meaningful way.
Sure. Thank you, Lauren. And Lily, what about you? I think we have you on mute, Lily.
Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Okay. Second Helpings has about 340 volunteers. So when this started, we realized that most of our volunteers were over 65 years of age. So we have a lot that are younger, but most of them fall into the 60 and above age group. So one of the first things we did is we let our volunteers know that we did not expect them to continue to volunteer and to do that without any kind of guilt. And if they wanted to continue volunteering, that was fine. We had also built a very strong board. I have a very active board that took on their roles during this crisis. And I have a staff that knows their job and they are strong leaders themselves. So they took on the responsibility, the added responsibility, because the trucks had to go out every day. We have a team of, we have great agencies. We partnered with them right away to find out who was going to be open, who wasn't, what is their new delivery system to give out food to their neighbors. And then we reached out to our partners like Coastal Foundation and just let them know what we needed. We needed to start purchasing food because when we first started this crisis, the grocery stores had very little food because everybody was buying the food up. So we right away went into let's buy food mode. And we were very open with our supporters. And we're very fortunate because feeding people is like a priority with a lot of donors right now. So we were quick at thanking our donors, and communication was constantly going on with all of our audiences.
Yeah, I heard both of you say, and I just want to follow up on that, on your initial responses to that early question. I heard both of you talk a little bit about, one, communicating to your staff. We talk about clarity of direction. But I want you to respond to this idea of how important was communication at the outset of the pandemic. Lily, you talked about, frankly, calling up the foundation and communicating with donors about needs and expectations, volunteers about this is how you're going to pivot. And so I want to draw on two things. One is, what were the types of questions you got about, okay, are we going to be okay? And then secondly, how did you communicate at the outset of the pandemic to your different stakeholders within the organization and outside, and what has been the result of that early communication, if you can share. And Lily, we'll start with you, Lauren.
Okay, we have e-blasts that went out right away to all of our different audiences. We have our audiences segmented, so a different message went out to each one related to what they needed to know. So we did that constantly. I did that 1 or 2 times a week at the beginning, just so they knew. And then I was always available for phone calls anytime for them to call back and see if there was clarity they needed on it. And believe me, sometimes there's a lot of clarity that's needed, because you think you're saying everything and you know that you're not. And then whenever someone brought a point to me that maybe wasn't clear, I would send out another e-blast to try to clarify in case you have a question about this issue here. So we are constantly using MailChimp to get out to our audiences. And then, of course, our coordinators, we have a coordinator north of the Broad River and south of the Broad River. They were at each truck, always talking to, well, when they could. I mean, sometimes we isolated them because we had some issues with one of our coordinators had a health issue, but our volunteers then stepped in and we met with the crews every morning to keep them informed on what was going on.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Lauren.
So for us, our organization is really grounded in that deep relationship with our families and kids, along with other stakeholders. So initially, when this started happening, I checked in personally. I love phone calls and I love connecting with people in that way. So I reached out in that way, checking on families, checking on our donors and stakeholders to make sure that they were doing okay during the crisis, and just let them know that some defining characteristics of Kids on Point being in an in-person setting or within the athletic space was not what defined us during this, that it was about that relationship and that we were going to continue to have that deep connection with our families. So we've been doing that. I've had a lot of personal connections with a lot of our stakeholders. We chat with our families each week to check in, beyond delivering Camp in the Box and beyond our Zoom calls with the kids. We're making sure that everyone's doing okay, that they understand what we're doing as an organization and what we'll continue doing, whether it's virtual or in person.
Yeah, as you guys sort of look back over the last several months, again, we've added sort of economic uncertainty to fundraising sort of landscape, maybe a little bit. We're just unsure. The political environment may be a little unsure. And then we have this whole social justice, racial equity sort of movement going on that in many ways will influence maybe political outcomes at the local, state, and federal level in this fall. As you look back at your work and your leadership, what are the key attributes of resilience have you demonstrated personally in helping to lead and guide your organization? If you were to draw on 1 or 2 things in hindsight, what are those 1 or 2 things that you think have really positioned you to be where you are right now as an organization and as a leader?
Who would you like to go first?
Lauren, go. I'm sorry, I set it up that way. I'm sorry.
I think for us, it's really being able to not fully kind of feel the stress of the situation, to really think big picture. We were lucky to have come out of a strategic planning process prior to this. So we have set out goals and objectives for the organization for 5 years. But I'm just a firm believer in collaboration and being able to depend on leaders like yourselves in this conversation. You learn a lot. I think you're able to model that behavior and really lean on others through this crisis, because we all cannot be in our silos doing this independently. This has definitely shown us that we have to work in partnership and we have to work in collaboration. And I would say that that has been one of the biggest factors of Kids on Point transitioning effectively through this, is that we have been able to depend on those groups.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Lily.
Yeah, and I agree. We reached out right away to our agencies to get their input on what's going on. I was always in contact with our president and leadership team at our agency, so they constantly knew what was going on. So I think that was really important in the funders. But you know, I think it's important that you have a strong team at the beginning. Like you said, you came out of a strategic planning session. So if you have built that strong team before a crisis hits, then you're able to adapt to a crisis. If you don't have that strong team, then your boy, you got some scurrying to do. So that's support grow. I mean, I learned that from crisis communication. My background is in communication and crisis planning, and you know, the team's got to be ready for whatever's going to happen. And we're already getting ready for a hurricane if it comes. I mean, you've got to think ahead. I mean, I'm already got my passes to get back into the community. My trucks already have their passes. You know, you've got to think ahead, and you have a team that works with you on that.
Yeah, it's Lily, you talk about this when you make the inference to hurricane season. We're in it. This year is sort of stacked up to be maybe an active hurricane season for our region. What you're alluding to is a sense of awareness, situational awareness, understanding the times in which we find ourselves and what's required of us as leaders. And on this call, there are other executive directors, there are board members, there are program people. I mean, it runs the gamut. And so I want to just sort of turn just a quick bit personal in terms of your own personal awareness. You know, so self-awareness is as much about being resilient in leadership as anything else. And I'll start by saying that as a leader, I tend to like to walk around and just sort of find my way into people's offices. Well, that's impossible to do with the virtual environment we're in. And I struggled probably for the first month and a half with feeling like I knew enough about what was going on a day-to-day basis. And so we've had to do some things around organizational communication, specifically with me and my leadership team. And so I wonder if you are willing to share, what are those personal things from a personal leadership standpoint that you were challenged with as a leader that you've had to adapt in terms of your own leadership style, given the last 4 months, and what has been the result of that for you? Lily, I'll start.
Okay, I'll start. I think that, you know, you're the executive director, so you think you have all the answers, and you don't. I think that you have to, maybe you don't win the battle. Somebody's ideas, they want to move forward on that idea rather than the idea that you had. So to adapt to that and say, you know, you all are reaching for the same goal. You're all trying to make sure the mission stays strong. So I think that letting go of some of your responsibilities to your team is important. And that's something I've learned from this. And that it's very valuable.
Yeah, delegation and then trusting, right? And trusting the team to execute. Lauren.
I definitely thrive with human interaction. Our office space is very tight, and we all work as a team in that office space. So we're all in very close quarters most of the time. So adapting to a Zoom environment and being able to keep morale up as a staff, especially the first couple of months, was pretty easy to do that because we had a specific track. We knew what we were doing. But then as things started to change, COVID numbers started to increase again in Charleston, we really took a shift, and we kind of saw that light at the end of the tunnel coming into summer, that we were going to be able to get the kids back in an in-person capacity. And then that had to be canceled because Charleston is such a hot spot at the moment. So we really had to boost that morale. So we got together as a team. We delivered Camp in the Box to the kids. So it's just thinking of ways for me to engage staff outside to make sure that they're doing okay. We're all in different circumstances. One of my staff members has a young child. One is single and lives alone. So everybody's facing different things, and to be understanding, to be flexible in schedule, to give people some time off and some space to think and reflect. I've always emphasized a sense of urgency with all of our projects, but at certain instances, there was a moment that we all needed to take a step back and be able to reflect and be able to see the bigger picture of what we were doing in the coming months, the coming years.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I want to just remind everyone who's listening to this conversation, if you do have questions for Lauren or Lily or myself, please do put it in the chat box. Laura is monitoring the chat box, and we're happy to respond to any questions that you may have as we have this discussion. So I'll continue because I don't see any questions in the chat box at this point.
There is one question, Darrin.
Okay.
And the question, it's actually in the question box. And the question is, did you consider yourselves to be resilient leaders prior to the pandemic?
We can start.
I'll start first. I don't know if I ever considered myself a resilient leader. I was so honored to be included in this panel. I guess I am, but I think that you're only a good leader if you have a good team. And so I applaud my entire team.
Yeah, thank you. Lauren.
I agree with that. I didn't really know that there's a definition. I think it is agreed with Lily that it's about that teamwork and always being in a position where you can change and improve, that adaptability and flexibility. And working with kids, it is always that way. So this was not a new space for us.
Yeah. And personally, sort of like Lily, I had heard of this idea of resiliency and resilient leadership, but I never really personally considered myself a resilient leader as much as I really believe that all leaders, if you're leading an organization, there are certain principles and concepts that you either automatically sort of apply because of experience and you sort of call to it, or you stumble into, and then you learn through maybe some mistakes or whatever else. But yeah, never really considered that for myself. Let me follow up, Lauren. Is there another one, Lauren?
There is.
Sorry.
When you
Yes.
look at 6 months with COVID and the impact it's having on people from a health, finance, education, and employment perspective, what's the one thing you will do to reposition your business to still be relevant and impactful in your communities as leaders of your organization?
Yeah. And
It's a great question.
can you repeat the question? You kind of broke up just a little bit.
Yep, absolutely. When you look at the next 6 months with COVID and the impact it's having on people from a health, finance, education, and employment perspective, what's the one thing you'll do to reposition your business to still be relevant and impactful in your communities as a leader of your organization?
Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Tony Ghostin, for asking
Tony.
that.
Hey, Tony from Beaufort, Bluffton area.
For second helpings, I can tell you, should I start? For second helpings, what we're doing right now, we have a business forward plan. We have all outlined. One of the first things we did is get a task force together and say, what are we going to look like in the future? We're looking at all our technology, how we're going to have to improve on that, maybe spend some money on technology. But we're also looking at our volunteer structure and say, maybe we need to start recruiting some younger volunteers. And then we're also looking at our budget and saying that many of the funding that we receive from thrift stores and plantations and stuff like that, our communities are going to be less money available. So we're going to have to tighten our belt.
Yeah. Lauren.
Our families and students will really guide this conversation. They've expressed the needs going into the school year. We were able to adapt out of summer and in-person capacity to do the camp in the box, and those are just interactive educational lessons. We provide all the supplies for the kids. Those are delivered every 2 weeks. That will continue through July and August, and then we'll continue speaking with families and students to figure out what their needs are going into either an in-person setting or a virtual setting, and decide from there with our board and our team on when we will go back to an in-person setting and what that will look like. As far as budget, I think that we all have to be thinking as nonprofits that we are going to have a lot of impacts from this. So for us personally, we are putting together a variety of different budget scenarios, just given what fall may look like. So one is kind of a worst case scenario, looking at a potential 15 to 30% drop in funding to a middle of the road. And then if we are able to maintain fundraising as we have in previous years, and it's really just, for me, it's that transparency. It's being transparent with our board of what next year will look like. It's being transparent with our parents so I can empower them to decide if their kids want to come back to an in-person setting or they want to continue in a virtual setting. So that's what we're working on as a team, to make sure that every stakeholder of Kids on Point is empowered to make the right decision, and they know that what we're doing moving forward.
Fantastic. Thank you guys for sharing. And if I can share, I think for us at the foundation, we did a lot, Lauren, of what you just described. Our fiscal year is a July 1 fiscal year. Back in the spring, we really started doing some planning around investment return, what that might look like over the next year, frankly, through this year and then the following year. And we've got exceptional volunteers that have been both board and committee volunteers who have been just very, very engaged with us as we plan in many of the same ways that you have. But for me, if there's one thing that I'm focused on over the next several months, it's the health and well-being of our staff. We can't do what we do without the exceptional team members that we have across the affiliate foundations we have and CCF proper. And so it's been a priority for me and our leadership team and board to ensure that our staff are healthy and safe, that the anxiety that parents with children in schools may be facing based on the decisions that they're going to have to make this fall, that we alleviate some of that anxiety by making sure that they understand that we're going to be as flexible with them and their schedules as possible. We've been doing it this long, and we're going to continue to do that. And then we approach this fiscal year understanding that there are some uncertainties. So our board's approved about 4 different things for us to really think about, both in terms of provision of grants that we will do for the community, fundraising in terms of maybe a second COVID push, depending on how long this lasts. So all of the things that you would think that we would do as a community foundation, we've done, and now it's about execution for us, and making sure that we're executing the plan and actually being able to course correct is the word we use here, as we read reality truthfully. So thank you for that question. I do want to follow up, Laura, just real quickly, because we talk about, and I know we've got another question, but I want to follow up with Lauren and Lily on Lauren, something you said earlier, and it was the leaning on others. And I just want to ask, how has your relationship as executive directors with your board changed, and is your board as resilient as you maybe expected? Are they demonstrating more resilience? How has that been working with the board under these conditions and circumstances? And what might you share with another leader who may be challenged or not as successful as it sounds like you guys have been in this particular time?
We, as I mentioned earlier, we wrapped up with the strategic plan that we had been doing for the 9 months prior. We had a mix of board members and community members on that task force, and May and June is kind of the normal time that we bring on new board members. So we actually brought on 5 new board members in May. And it really has been amazing. Those individuals have been directly a part of the strategic planning task force, so knew a lot of what the organization's goals and objectives were for the coming year. So really came on strong. They re-energized the board, and we've had a lot of conversations individually. We've been able to have virtual board meetings, but the board has been incredibly supportive. I think that there's a lot of excitement around what we're doing. And like I mentioned earlier, it's really about the depth of those relationships, and it goes beyond any other aspect of our program. And I think our board is really in tune with that and excited to see how we can assist as this continues and make sure that our students and families have the resources that they need to be successful in the coming weeks and months. So I've been really excited with our board. It's kind of a difficult time to transition new board members on, leading into the summer and then everything that's going on. But it really has been great. We've been able to connect over Zoom. I've been able to connect with the committees, but we have a lot of work to do in that regard. There's always ways that we can improve board engagement, improve our engagement with both our kids and our families and our stakeholders and donors. So we're constantly, that's a big focus.
Yeah, thank you. Lily.
Second Helpings Board of Directors, like I said, they're a working board. They've allowed me to be creative. When we were losing volunteers, I partnered with the hospitality workers on Hilton Head Island to work on the trucks. That was very positive. They have been stepping up. We've had a couple new board members joined us in the last 6 months that have taken over communications and volunteer recruitment. So they're trying to free up my time so I can handle the issues that keep coming up every day. We had 2 staff people who had to leave. I had 2 coordinators, and they both are switching over and leaving us. One, because she's going to have to homeschool her children. The other one, like I said, had a health issue. So I got them involved in training, and my board has let me do that. They've been very supportive of that. Didn't get involved in the hiring process, which was very positive because we were able to move forward really quickly. And actually, my Buford coordinator actually chose a staff person that was much like her. So I trusted her judgment, so it was great. So, and like I said, right away we had a task force. Right away we have a checklist. I have a program management program software that I'm using that we're checking off, notifying everybody about safety and all the steps we're taking, and they're monitoring all that. We've had board meetings virtually. All our committee meetings are virtually. And lastly, our annual meeting right away. The fundraising committee decided not to hold the annual meeting, so we put out an invitation for our Share the Bounty no-show and have raised $30,000 already with that event. So we're giving them a little truck and they love it. So it's been a great team, and we've learned a lot from each other from doing this.
Fantastic. Laura, I think we have a question.
We do. So thank you all for being so candid. Lauren, hitting the pause button and allowing staff the time to breathe is invaluable. So that more of a comment than a question. And then there was a question for you, Lily, which, whoops, sorry. Here we go, I'm spaced out. There are often issues that are out of our control during this unpredictable time. As leaders, how do you go about addressing issues that may not have an easy answer or solution at this time? Do you have any advice on easing concerns?
Yeah.
Well, we recently had a volunteer on the truck tested positive for COVID. So right away, we had to go into action. I had to notify the teams that had worked with that volunteer, notify the agencies that received the food, notify. And then there was concern. So I was available for any phone call, any email message that came back to clarify the situation. Fortunately, he volunteered once a month, so that made it a lot easier. But we know that that's going to keep happening. We have another agency that just closed this past week because of a COVID test. So we have to be ready for all of those constantly changing and and as far as free time, I really haven't had any free time. I was due to go on vacation when this hit, and I'm looking forward. So I relaxed by planning my next trip. So that's my escape. I watch travel shows. So, and go virtually wherever I want to go. So, but my team is, I know we burn our team out with this whole thing because they're on the trucks all the time, especially in Buford. To let the board know and let them know that we really appreciate them and to personally thank them, not just send them a email to all my staff or all my volunteers. I like to personally thank them because it means more if you reach out personally to thank them.
Mm-hmm. Lauren?
Yeah, it's been a lot of the same with us as well, just reaching out, thanking everyone. Can you repeat the question? I kind of got sidetracked in Lily's response.
Sure. Basically, oh, sorry. was on to the next question, so I have to go back.
It's
Sorry.
really a question about how are you dealing with the unknown, the
Yeah,
things
and unpredictable.
that you didn't anticipate, the ongoing sort of questions, and in some cases the immediacy of people wanting to have an answer to something that, you know, is just completely unknown. So how are you working through that?
You know, it changes on an hourly basis. So we think that we know what schools are going to do. We think we know what the college is going to do. And then cases continue to increase. So I've really been, my board has been very helpful in that. But we ultimately are deciding kids on points course, and there's a sense of urgency in doing so. So my staff is constantly thinking of ways that we can be better engaged, how we can improve our systems, and even when we are able to go back in person. So we've been doing a lot of work towards that. But I don't know if there's a great answer for that, because we see it at every turn now. And you just, I just feel like you have to look beyond that. If not, it really can set you back. It can get depressing. It can really reduce morale if we think about day in and day out all the negativity that's happening in the world. And sometimes you just have to take it back to the organization and say that this is the space that we're working in. How can we best serve our students and families in this space, and look beyond what's going on in other areas? Like I can't plan around what CCSD is doing. I can't plan around what the college, but what is Kids on Point going to continue to do? And it's going to continue to have that connection with our families. It's going to continue to expand out and meet basic needs, or meet the needs that they express. So really that's been our guiding force outside of any of the other announcements that have been coming out.
Yeah. And I'll just add that I think in some instances, well, I've said I don't know more in the last 5 months than I probably have in my entire career, just because of the uncertainty of what happens day to day. You know, back in April, we were targeting a June, 15 reopen date for the office, but we left ourselves the opportunity to say, well, if this thing surges, so I think it's okay, and I think it's important for leaders on this call to say to themselves, their board, their staff, frankly, I don't know, but then to come back and reaffirm what you do know. Here's what we do know. We do know that we're making an impact here, that our services are important here, that we're gonna have to change at some point, and to some degree, we're gonna have to pivot. So let's go ahead and plan for what we know. And I think that's an important aspect of being resilient. Lauren, to your point, Lily, to your point, clarity of direction, just being clear about what you're in business to do, and why that's important and valuable to the communities we serve. And then being willing and capable, I think, of pivoting when we need to pivot without a wholesale disruption of the core business that we do. So I think those things are very important. Laura, you have another question?
I do. This question is, how can we keep on filling the humanity gap for our residents and clients when we know broadband and access to the internet is not available to all? South Carolina is so far behind when our neighbors are further marginalized by this. Great question.
Yeah. So how do we fulfill the humanity gap? Is that, I think it's speaking to connection, not just for children who may need and require access as we open schools, but maybe for people who feel disconnected because they don't have the ability to do what we're doing right now. And so I think it's a broader question, frankly, about love for community and how do we engage people who maybe, frankly, have been disconnected. Any thoughts, Lauren or Lily?
I think it's definitely a big concern, especially older populations having to stay at home and not having that social interaction that's key. Our younger students doing the same. we are almost putting parents in an impossible position to decide on safety and sending kids back to school, but also not having that bandwidth or access in a virtual sense. So we need to do a lot of work in that regard. I think CCSD with the hotspots and the buses have done a great job. There's been a lot of organizations that have been delivering food to elderly populations and at least having, a socially distanced face-to-face. So I think that we're going to really have to think about innovative ways to connect beyond a screen and beyond kind of this virtual platform, and make sure that everyone's doing okay. And I don't know the exact answer to that, but our state's going to have to do a better job of making sure to extend access, particularly in the rural areas. There's even downtown areas that there's not necessarily access. So, and I guess with our education focus, making sure that the kids do have access to technology, that they do have hotspots or internet at home. That's something that we're checking in individually with. But I do think that we have to do a better job as a community of recognizing some of the vulnerable populations and thinking of creative ways to connect.
Yeah, great. Lily, any comments on that one?
I totally agree with what's been said. I mean, right now we have to go out and talk to them. We have to do the old-fashioned ways, go out and, have our volunteers go out there and talk on the trucks and talk to the people that they're dropping food off at. And that we serve a rural area, Hampton County. And one of the things that we did is I got a call that, we have 55 agencies, but there are a lot of groups out there that are not part of us. They're not part of our agencies, and they're not part of Low Country Food Bank. So we started, and my board has been so supportive, we started food drives. We've got communities that are doing food drives, so we're taking non-perishable. I can't provide them with perishable foods, but I said, well, I can provide them with cereal and pasta sauce and pasta. So right now I have a truckload that one of the rural agencies is coming to pick up the food today. So I think you have to go to the old-fashioned way, but that's not helping the kids. And I mean, that's not our mission, and I sympathize with all of that. But the elderly are people we try to take care of. So I'm surprised at how many of our community have access, but there's a lot of people in Hampton County and Jasper County that do not.
It's a question that that really provides some context for what CCF did about 3 years ago, almost now, when we did community conversations. There were 5 issues. We've narrowed to 3. But one of the issues was safe and connected communities, that there was a sense along the low country of South Carolina, and maybe some of that's geography with rivers and creeks and bridges, that people felt disconnected physically, but then also that there was this sense that people wanted to bring communities together. And I can only imagine what maybe some people in our rural areas, Hampton, Jasper, the Sea Islands, might be feeling now if they're disconnected from each other, even without broadband. So that's something that we need to really think about and consider. Laura, I think there's a time for at least one more question for Lauren and Lily to respond to, and then we'll turn this back over to you for wrap up.
So there's one question specific to Lily, so we'll ask you this one, Lily, which is, how has this impacted your farmers?
Actually, we're getting lots of produce. From our farmers, you mean? Like, yes, we are picking up that food and taking it out. So we're got watermelons, tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers. So I don't see much impact with, we deal mainly with Dempsey Farms, and then we also deal with a wholesaler out of Savannah. And the agencies with the wholesaler get to actually pick what they want. They get a product list and they pick it out. So we're spending a lot of our grant money. We've gotten lots of COVID funding that we've developed a budget that goes through now till April. That helps us, it's going to help us meet those needs with fresh produce.
Yeah. And go ahead, Laura.
I was going to say, Lauren, the last question can default to you, even though it's both of you, which is, how have you modified your self-care and personal activities since the pandemic started?
Ooh, I don't know if I'm the right person to answer this question. I don't know. It's been a struggle. I'm a mom to an 8-year-old, and I will say that homeschooling was not. I'm not suited to be a homeschooling teacher, so that was a struggle. I don't know. I think people are balancing a lot. Thankfully, I have a great husband who's taken on a lot of the responsibilities, but self-care has not been my strong suit. In the past, I've been doing a lot more exercising. I think the dog is tired of walking, especially in the heat right now. But I've been able to take some time off and really reflect, and it has been great spending some additional time as a family at home. We do a lot. Our backyard looks like a amusement park, so you know we've been able to do a lot of things like that in a family sense. But there's been a lot of focus on this, and I do feel a sense of urgency when it comes to what we're doing at Kids on Point. So I can do a better job in the self-care and don't necessarily do the best job at it right now.
Yeah. Lily.
Actually, I'm with you. I just haven't had time to take any time off. And I don't really want to take time off and stay in the community because I'll get a lot of phone calls. So I might as well be at the office and take the phone calls. When I'm having a bad day, I usually go home because I come into the office 3 days a week and tell my husband that, what kind of wine do we have today? I want a glass of wine. We are exercising more, and I love photography, so I'm actually taking photography classes in my spare time online and learning more about how to use my camera.
Yeah, and I'll just sort of close out this conversation with Lauren and Lily and everyone listening in, and just sort of encourage all of us as organizational leaders, donors, again, board members, to help facilitate the self-care. Again, we're uncertain about how long and how far in the future this pandemic and these issues are going to go, and I think our organizations, our donors, our stakeholders, our communities need us to be our best selves in these times and in the future. So if it means, frankly, taking a Friday off when you can get away and sort of vegging out, go do that, or taking pictures, or doing the bouncy ball in the backyard, Lauren, you got to do it. Our colleague here, Melissa Levesque, did something pretty incredible a couple of weeks ago. She basically turned her phone off and encouraged everyone and her team to do the same thing. And I can't remember what she technically called it, but it was literally her way of message of saying, I'm really going to check out. And so she disconnected the email function on the phone, so she couldn't get email. She could get phone calls, but she couldn't get emails, and I thought that was brilliant. And so if you can find 5 hours of white space to reflect and do those types of things, I think you should do it. And I think our boards, just based on what you shared today, would encourage that. And so thank you too for joining us on this call and for your insight, your transparency, your authenticity to answer some questions. And I hope it's been helpful to everyone listening in on the call today. Laura, thank you, and SVP, and again, Dominion, for hosting us in this conversation. We'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Darrin. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Lily. You all have really, I think, enlightened us all on what it means to be resilient and why being a resilient leader is important. For those of you who want to go back and capture something that you may have missed, you'll get a recording of this presentation, which will include the slides that Darrin showed at the beginning, as well as some additional handouts and a recent article from Stanford Social Innovation Review, which talks all about the importance of self-care as it relates to being a good leader, particularly those of you in the social justice movement. I hope that everyone will join us on August 11th. We have another great webinar. It is Reshaping Your Strategic Plan for Resilience and Recovery, and it's being we have a great panel again for that webinar, So you'll all get information about that, as well as the survey. Please take a few minutes to fill out the survey. Again, really brief, and it's important to the foundation and SVP to really hear from each of you so that we can deliver the kinds of programs that you want, so that, as the program name, LEAD, Learn, Engage, Advance, Deliver, we can all lead together as we navigate through these uncertain times. So again, thank you to our panelists, and thank you to everyone from throughout South Carolina who joined us. We really appreciate it and look forward to seeing you on the 11th. Have a great day,
Thank you
everyone.
very much.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Lily. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.